This video is about the Versailles Treaty, which was signed on the 28th of June 1919. It was a peace treaty between the victors of World War I and the German Empire. To the background of course is World War I. The Germans fought mainly against the British and French in the west and the Russians in the east. The German forces were quite successful in the beginning and they could occupy vast parts of northeast France. In 1917, the United States entered World War I, and in January 1918, President Wilson laid down his idea of a post-war order. He wanted sustainable peace. You can see in the point 1 and 4. He also followed US economic interests, freedom of navigation and equality of trade terms, points 2 and 3. He wanted Germany, of course, to evacuate occupied territories, points 6 to 8, and he followed the principle of self-determination of the people, points 9 to 12. Furthermore, point 13, a Polish state should be re-established. And not to forget, he wanted to found or to have the League of Nations established, the forerunner of nowadays United Nations. Back to the war. Russia, now Soviet Russia, retired from the war in March 1918. That meant German divisions were free to engage the enemy in the west. The German Spring Offensive was tactically very successful, but from a strategic point of view, a failure because there were no proper objectives. In response, the Allies launched the 100 Days Offensive and drove the German forces out of France. The Central Powers were exhausted and the German allies retired from the war one after the other. Germany exhausted as well. End of October 1918, the November Revolution broke out, which should lead to the Weimar Republic. So the war was all but over, and hostilities ended on the 11th of November 1918 with the armistice of Compiègne. In January 1919, the Paris Peace Conference convened. They were all the victors of World War I. The Central Powers were excluded. They could only communicate in written form. They were all the victors, but the outcome of the conference was determined by the Big Four, the UK, France, the US and Italy. Therefore, first a look at the objectives of the Big Four. The main objectives were for France to permanently weaken Germany and gain high war reparations. The United Kingdom followed her traditional approach and wanted a balance of power in continental Europe. Now Soviet Russia was seen as the main threat. The United States, as shown with Wilson's 14 points, wanted sustainable peace and free trade. Italy's objectives were focused on territorial gains, but these gains were more important, or these objectives were more important for negotiations with other Central Powers. Now to the key points of the Versailles Treaty. Germany was given sole liability for the war. There were also some significant, substantial territorial changes. Germany lost quite a few territories, to mention here Alsace-Lorraine and West Prussia and parts of Silesia. The German forces, the pride of the empire, should be limited to 150,000 men, and there were quite high war reparations. And as mentioned earlier, not to forget, the founding of the League of Nations also comes back to the Versailles Treaty. On the 7th of May 1919, the Allies demanded the German delegation to sign the Versailles Treaty. The German delegation was not happy with the conditions. They refused. Even Social Democrat Scheidemann should have said, "Which hand, putting us and itself in chains like these, would not wither?" The German delegation unsuccessfully tried to soften the conditions. The Allies just said, "Right, you do not need to sign, but then we will invade Germany further than the River Rhine." So, on the 28th of June 1919, the German delegation signed the Versailles Treaty, but protested. Approximately 3/4 of a year later, the Versailles Treaty came into effect. What followed was further peace treaties with the other Central Powers. What was the impact and what is the historical assessment of the Versailles Treaty? Maréchal Foch stated, "It is not a peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. And sadly, he should be right, because 20 years after, the Second World War started. A German historian said, "The problem with regards to sustainable peace was that Germany, as a Central European power, was neither permanently weakened nor permanently integrated." Now we come to the assessment. Here you can go deeper, of course, but here I try to sum it up by the structure, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. On the one hand, you can say the conditions of the Versailles Treaty were so hard that the Weimar Republic had to fail and the Nazis were necessarily coming to power. Amongst others, Keynes, the economic and also part of the British delegation, said it was a peace like Carthage had to endure. On the other hand, historians say the Versailles Treaty was quite moderate because Germany was preserved and Germany remained the dominant power in Central and Eastern Europe. Barnett, for instance, said it was hardly a slap on the wrist. Evans said the Versailles Treaty only marginally influenced Germany, and in this way of thinking, it was not the Versailles Treaty that was the main reason for the rise of the Nazis, but the Great Depression following a decade later. And if you put this together to a synthesis, for the rise of the Nazis, not the Versailles Treaty from an objective point of view was the problem, but from the perception as an ignoble peace. That was the problem that enabled the Nazis to rise to power. That was the Versailles Treaty.